want to start out with the word passion. Of course, the concept of passion really conveys a strong, barely controllable emotional state. It's an intense desire. It is a state of being really acted upon or affected by an external cause. So it can be somebody's own passion or something that's being pushed upon them. Passion is a person's fierce drive to continually seek ways to bring about or share what they have, what they're passionate about. Since the type of intensity and experience may bring about physical suffering, it is often directly associated with suffering both physically and mentally. So you will actually hear a reference to the passions of Christ, and it's referring to the sufferings, okay, because this word is also used as physical. Over in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 24, we see this word being used here, and it says here, the word passion refers to the results of a stimulus that causes suffering or involves enduring strong desires from the flesh. Galatians chapter 5 and verse 24 says, "And those who are Christ have crucified the flesh and its passions and desires." So you have both the passions and the desires of the sin nature. These fleshly desires create intense emotional hunger and mental suffering as we try to satisfy them. Passions of the flesh then comes from the sin nature within us. That's where they ultimately come from. The law arouses the sin nature's passions and then produces fruit leading unto death. Romans chapter 7 and verse 5 talks about this. For when we were in the flesh, the sinful passions which were aroused by the law were at work in our members to bear fruit to death. Now, of course, here is talking about trying to use a law to dictate whether you're righteous or not. So using law really for self-righteousness, that produces within us a passion, because you can see people who are law abiders, they're very intense about abiding by the law. They're very passionate about that. Well, that comes from the sin nature. And then the sin nature is going to produce these types of fruit that produce death. And that death is a separation. And especially since we're in Romans chapter 7, we're talking about a separation from our ability to live out who we are in Christ, from our salvation. So they produce death. And of course, they oppose the desires to do good. You know, we have desires, we want to do good, but when we try to put law in the mix, the passions from the sin nature contradict the good we want to do. And then we're not able to actually perform this good. Such fruit is based on dead works of the law, not faith in Christ. This type of negative passion produces a religious person who suffers to obtain their own righteousness before God and others. When a believer tries to prove his righteousness by following laws, the sin nature's passions take over and prevent him from being able to achieve the good he wants, since they only are going to be able to produce things that do not bring life. So Romans chapter 7, verses 16 through 17 talks about this. If then I do what I will not to do, or I do not want to do, I agree with the law that it is good. But now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. And he's talking about the sin nature. This is an interesting passage, and it does go well to have a good translation of this and identify the eyes that he's referring to. Because he's talking about the struggle that we have between our new nature and our old nature. You know, if I do what I will not do, so that if I, the old nature, am doing what I, the new nature, do not want to do, then I actually agree that the law is good, because the law is exposing the sin nature for what it truly is. But then, of course, it's not I, the new person, because when we're functioning from who we are in Christ, functioning from that new man, we can't sin, because we actually are born from a seed that is incorruptible. So it's not that part of us that's doing the wrong things. It's that sin nature that we have in us. Since passion refers to suffering, both physical and mental, we may suffer because of situations that we actually face. The passions of this present time do not compare to the coming glory. So the things that we suffer in Romans chapter 8 and verse 18, it talks about this. Well, the coming glory is going to by far exceed them. For I consider that the sufferings, and this word sufferings here is the passions of this present time, are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Even creation groans within itself under the bondage that it's under right now, waiting for the deliverance of the sons of God to appear. Groaning here is described as labor pains, Romans chapter 8 and verse 21, because the creation itself also will be delivered from bondage, this bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. And that's when we're actually, and if I recall, that Romans chapter 8 and verse 21 actually says the sons of God, because talking about when we are revealed in our full, when we're fully resurrected. Christ was made a little lower than the angels for the passion of death, but is now raised to honor and glory. We see that over in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 9. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels, for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, might taste death for every one of us. Through his passions, he became the author of our salvation. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 10 talks about this. For it was fitting for him, for whom are all things and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to make the captain or author of their salvation mature through suffering. Your word perfect there literally means mature. So his passions include not just the physical suffering on the cross, but also his intense desire to obey God the Father's will, surrendering his will to God the Father's will. That did relate to a passion that was within him. And of course, this does relate to us as Christians. As we live out our identity in Christ, we should share in this passion. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. And this, of course, is a passion to do God's desirous will in our lives. Who comforts us in all of our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble, with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. For as the passions of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also abounds through Christ. And again, this word suffering here, it's focusing on your passions. This passion can be a strong emotional response to wrongdoing, or it can be physical suffering. That is, it can cause physical suffering. And this would stem from the passions of the righteousness we have in Christ, where we want to live out that righteousness. Those in Christ have crucified the passions and desires of the flesh because they oppose the Spirit. And actually, we were over there in Galatians, where we had that in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 24. Whoever ceases from sin actually suffers in the flesh. The flesh wants you to produce sin. It has an intense desire to do that. Well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give in. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 1 talks about that. Therefore, since Christ suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same mind, for those who have suffered in the flesh have ceased from sin. Those strong desires, that strong passion that we get to do things. When we realize that we are in Christ, worldly things become worthless to us. See this over in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 8. Yet indeed, I also count all things lost for the excellence of the knowledge of Jesus Christ my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things and counted them as rubbish, that I may gain Christ. Now, understanding the situation with Paul, Paul was being raised to be the teacher of Israel. And he would have had the most prestigious position in Israel, but he gave that up because he wanted to know Christ. It's like, no, Christ is more valuable than that. I'm not going to yield the knowledge that he was given and go back under the law. The passions for righteousness inspire a desire to conform to Christ's death, seeking resurrection life. And of course, the death is I'm dead to the sin nature, and I'm dead to the world. I'm not going to live according to what it wants. Philippians chapter 3, verses 9 through 11 talk about this. And be found in him, not having my own righteousness, which is from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness which is from God by faith, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. And of course, knowing the power of his resurrection is living out resurrection life, living out that newness of life we have in Christ, so that we may know that, and the fellowship of his sufferings, that is his passions, being conformed to his death, if by any means I may attain to the resurrection out from the dead. He's not talking about obtaining something through his own self-works. He's very clear. It's not through my works. It's through I am in Christ and living it out. Passion within Christians comes from a strong attachment to doing what is right and living out the righteousness that they possess in Christ. It is not a passion worked out from the flesh or the desires of the sin nature. That's not how we live out the Christian life. For those types of passions, they actually are to be rejected in the Christian life. Because, we have died with Christ and we've been raised to walk in newness of life. So our passion should be to live out that new life. Our passion should be not to be found with our own righteousness, but to be found with the righteousness that we have in Christ and living that out and using it. And this is our concept of passion. So when we're talking about putting the passion of the sin nature, the flesh to death and separating from that is this very strong emotional, almost barely controllable emotional type of a state. And of course, the suffering that comes from failing to abide by the desires of the flesh and not willing to actually give in to them.